Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. So Zelensky is ready for elections, but not probably elections. The more correct word is that Zelensky is ready for the referendum. So what kind of referendum we're talking about? So according to information we have, Zelensky is still against the peace agreement clause on the withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from the entire territory of Donbass. Ukraine's position on Donbass remains unchanged. We stand where we stand. Will Ukraine agree to a free economic zone in the Donetsk region? The people of Ukraine will answer this question. So he says that he's going to have a referendum. Ukraine is going to have a referendum where people will be asked whether they're ready to create or whether they will accept the free economic zone in the Donetsk region. The American side sees that Ukrainian troops are withdrawing from the territory of Donbass, and the compromise seems to be that Russian troops do not enter this territory of Donbass. Who will govern this territory, which they now call a free economic zone or a demilitarized zone? They don't know. This is roughly how the compromise vision of the United States of America looks like now, he stated. So the situation is a very simple one. Zelensky and Ukraine will have a referendum, and where people of Ukraine will be asked a simple question whether they are ready and whether they agree to withdraw their positions, their forces from the territory of the rest of Donbass. Here we're going to see something like a free economic zone or the demilitarized zone. Nobody knows for sure who is going to govern these territories, but this is something like a compromise between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. You know that this is a very important question, and if you ask my opinion, I believe that this is a correct step from the Ukrainian side. And not just for Ukrainians, this is a very important and a very correct step for the Russian Federation, first of all. Because you know that the Russian Federation, the President of the United States of America, several days ago demanded that Ukraine and Zelensky, that Ukraine should have new elections where people of Ukraine will elect the new President of Ukraine. So, but you know that this is a very important thing, that the election of a new President of Ukraine doesn't mean that the war will be finished, you know. So there are no guarantees that if a new president is being elected, that the war in this case will be finished. Probably this can mean completely opposite. For example, if the former chief of the general staff or commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Zaluzhny, is being elected, this can lead to the prolongation of the war with the Russian Federation. Or, for example, if Syrsky is being elected as a president of Ukraine, this will also lead to the same situation, that the war between Russia and Ukraine will be continued. So that is why for the Russians, before making all elections, before making any energy truce, before making any, ceasefire along the line of combat contact for preparation before the beginning of these president elections, it's better for the Russian side to understand whether the Ukrainians themselves are ready for truce, are ready to settle the conflict peacefully, if the Ukrainians themselves are ready to accept the reality. So that is why it is important to have elections right now, before presidential elections, before the energy truce, before ceasefire, before everything, to understand the opinion of the Ukrainians themselves. And for example, imagine the situation if the referendum about the territories, about the peaceful settlement, if this referendum is, let's say, takes place, let's say, somewhere in July or May of 2026, and if people vote, for example, for the prolongation of the war with the Russian Federation, if people of Ukraine votes for not leaving and not withdrawing of their positions from the rest of Donbass. So that is why this is going to be a signal to Putin and to signal for the entire Russian Federation that it's too early to stop the special military operation, and if Russia allows Ukrainians to elect another president, the war will be continued. But the problem is, in this time for the Russian Federation, that Ukrainians with elections of president will strengthen its position, because Ukraine will have the legitimate president, and obviously the Russian Federation is not interested in this situation. So, of course, I believe that this is a correct step. First, to ask the Ukrainians themselves about this peaceful settlement of the conflict and about the territories, and based on the results of this referendum, to make further decisions whether to stop the war completely or to continue until Ukrainians accept the reality from their side. So, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously, the situation is becoming very interesting. At the same time, the president of the Russian Federation made lots of very interesting statements. Yesterday, he had a meeting with the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, and he reported about significant progress on the ground. So the president noted that good progress in the liberation of Donbass and Novorossiya. Highlights from the Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov's report to the President. Kucherevka and Kurilovka have been liberated. Sever fighters, the fighters of the Group of Forces North, are focusing their efforts on expanding the security zone in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. 45% of buildings in Konstantinovka have come under Russian control. The southern part of Dimitrov, Mirnograd, has been liberated. Fighting is ongoing in the center and north. Street fighting is ongoing in Gulay-Polye. Guards of units of Vostok fighters are also conducting an offensive in the south of Dnipropetrovsk region. So once again, this information was provided to the President of the Russian Federation by the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. So now let's discuss everything in details. We have lots of changes on the ground. And first, let's talk about the northern directions. Once again, according to this report, the Russians of the Group of Forces North are focusing their efforts on expanding the security zones in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. So when talking about the situation on the ground, we can see that this is something what is happening right now. Let's talk about the Sumy direction. We haven't been talking about this area for a very long period of time, and today, according to different pro-Russian sources, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the territory to the south of Andreevka. Basically, the Russians recaptured the territories they lost during the previous months, so the Russians are about to recapture lost positions during the Ukrainian Sumy counter-offensive operation. As for the northern Kharkiv direction, here we can see the same story. The Russians continue offensive operation. Just yesterday, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Liman, so the village was captured and secured by Russians, according to the Minister of Defense. And today we had a report that the Russians continue advancing, and as a result of clashes, the Russians improved their positions, and Russians answered the settlement by the name of Semyonovka. Furthermore, according to mappers, the Russians managed to answer the settlement of Prilipovka from the east. So now we understand that Russians are tasked to establish complete control over this territory. We are talking about the villages of Seminikovka, Gravskaya, Prilipovka, and the southern part of the settlement of Vilcha. When Russians finish the battle for this territory, they will be able to establish a very powerful foothold, and from these positions the Russians will launch their major offensive operation towards the settlement by the name of Belye Kolodys. Furthermore, in the same northeastern part of Kharkiv region, the Russians intensified their offensive operation between the villages of Ambarne and Kolodysne. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 11th of December, and this is the beginning of the 12th of December. The Russians managed to capture huge territories. According to neutral mappers, the settlement of Ambarne was caught by Russians in pincers. Furthermore, the Russians managed to shorten the distance to the village of Kolodysne. This offensive operation is aimed and tasked to move in the direction of the settlement of Veliki Burluk. So this is the Veliki Burluk offensive operation in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. Now let's discuss once again the statement that was made by a report that was made yesterday. So another important thing that the Chief of the General Staff stated that Kucherevka and Kurilovka have been liberated. So the Russians are trying to tell us that in the area of the city of Kupiansk, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Kucherevka and the village of Kurilovka. So the Russians captured the settlement of Kucherevka several days ago, probably at the beginning of this week, because we had report about this several days ago. Let's take a look. This report was published on the 7th of December of 2025. So this is the 6th of December, this is the 7th of December. So the Chief of the General Staff basically repeated the situation that took place almost a week ago. And today the Chief of the General Staff also added that Russians captured the mill village of Kurilovka. So these are the changes between the dates. So as of now, we don't know for sure where is the line of combat contact. So basically we adjusted the settlement of Kurilovka according to the borders, original borders of the settlement that you can find in the open source. So the Russians continue advancing further in the southern direction of the city of Kupiansk. The Russians continue counterattacks in the Zaskolye micro-district, and the battles, the clashes, the offensives from many directions are moving toward the settlement of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. Ukrainians are trying, they continue trying to stabilize the situation by bringing additional reinforcements and reserves, but everything that answers the Oskol River zone destroyed by Russians very fast. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk direction, or it's correct to say that this is already the Sloviansk direction. During the previous 48 hours, the map has been adjusted significantly. So this is the situation in this area by the end of the 6th of December of 2025. And this is basically the last days, this is the beginning of the last days for the Ukrainian contingent on the territory of the city of Siversk itself. The Russians improved their positions for the previous weeks significantly. Right now in front of your screens you can see how the map was changed during this period of time, and this is the situation by the 10th. This is the 11th of December of 2025 when Russians already published a video with dozens of flags through the settlement of Kupiansk, mainly in its central and eastern parts. This video was published somewhere at 2 p.m. of the Ukrainian time, and during this video lots of flags were published, but not all of them were geolocated. So that is why yesterday we discussed that we colored just a part of the city of Siversk, and we kept the central and the western parts as a gray zone, and the territory and the complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. But during the meeting between Putin and the Chief of the General Staff, another video was published, few more videos were published, and here we can see another video 10 minutes and 14 seconds where we can see another batch of episodes how Russians were raising their flags through the western and the central parts of the city of Seversk. So based on this video we came to the conclusion that the city of Seversk indeed was completely captured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and we have adjusted the map completely. Furthermore, the Russians managed to capture the city of Seversk. We have no doubts about this. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back in the western direction, and later in the evening of the 11th of December another video was published, this one, and here we can see how Ukrainians of the 54th Mechanized Brigade were attacking Russians in the fields in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Sviatopokrovskaya. So one of the episodes of those attacks took place exactly on the intersection of these three lines. So based on this video we also adjusted this part. So the Russians captured the city of Siversk, and the most important is that the Russians began advancing further in the western direction. We see that the Russians are moving very fast. We believe that Russians will be able to take most of these territories between the settlements of Ozerное, Zakitne, Platonovka, Seversk, and Sviatopokrovskaya, Kuzminovka, Zvanovka, so everything along this red line. Probably in coming days, we are not talking about months, we are talking about just maybe from 5 to 10 days, and everything along this red line would be captured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So as we discussed, this is already the beginning of the Sloviansk offensive operation. Of course, this attack and this progress could be postponed by Russians only in case if they decide first to capture the settlement of Liman. As for the settlement of Liman, there are very heavy clashes for this area. The Russians are storming this settlement from the east, and most likely due to the fact that the city of Siversk was captured, now the Russians have possibilities to redeploy additional forces in the Liman direction as well. So in this video, for example, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking the city of Liman with aviation, with FABs, trying to reduce the settlement to ruins and to prepare the city before the beginning of the ground operation. As for the city of Mirnograd, during the previous 12 hours, nothing has been published from this area. We believe that the situation here is also coming to its logical end, and we believe that in coming hours and maybe in coming days, the city of Mirnograd would be captured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation as well. Before moving further, another important statement is that according to the Chief of the General Staff, by the beginning of the 12th of December of 2025, the Russians captured around 45% of the city of Konstantinovka. So as for the current situation, the Russians control just probably around 10%. So if the information about 45% is correct, this means that the line of combat contact most likely goes somewhere along this red line, and everything to the east and to the left, basically, or to the right of this red line is already under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Of course, we are waiting for geolocations to confirm this, but 45% of the city of Konstantinovka is a very big number. As for Guliai-Polya, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff confirmed that the clashes are taking place on the territory of the city. The Russians are breaking through Ukrainian defense in the central part, and for example, today several pro-Russian sources stated that Ukrainian defense in the central part of the city collapsed completely. The Russians managed to establish control over the main hospital of the city of Guliai-Polya, and that the Russians continue advancing. Based on this report, we can make a conclusion that probably 10 days left before the Russians establish complete control over the territory of the city. So as you can see, the situation is very difficult, and as the president of the Russian Federation stated that Russia can get everything they want with the military means if Ukraine doesn't accept the diplomatic means. So that is why the Russians continue offensive. So that is why Ukraine needs to find a solution how to stabilize the situation. And for example, today we got report that this Saturday representatives from Ukraine, the US, and Europe will meet on Saturday to discuss a peace plan. According to Axios, basically they will meet to understand how to save the situation, how to rescue the current situation, and to force the Russians to stop or at least to slow down. But we understand that Russia will not accept, the Russians will continue. Kiev agrees to withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces and the creation of the buffer zone in Donbass, according to Le Monde. At the same time, Ukrainian authorities believe the withdrawal of both Ukrainian and Russian troops on both sides of the current front line is necessary. With downcast eyes and a trembling voice, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz acknowledged on Thursday, December 11th, that Ukraine is now ready to accept the territorial concessions. According to the publication, the withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from Donbass is included in the peace plan Zelensky presented to Trump. So tomorrow on Saturday, there's going to be a meeting between Zelensky, United Kingdom, France, and Germany, and the President of the United States of America made a very interesting statement about this. The US has not yet decided whether to attend the meeting with Europe on Ukraine tomorrow. So this means that if Europe and Ukraine stand on their position, on their 20-point plan, not on the 28-point plan of the President of the United States of America, most likely the President of the United States of America will avoid this meeting, which is going to be a very strong signal to Europeans and to Ukrainians that the United States of America quits the conflict, and then Europe and Ukraine will be forced to fight with the Russians alone without any support from the United States of America. We will attend if we think there is a good chance. We don't want to waste a lot of time. We'll see whether we attend the meeting or not. Trump confirmed that the US is ready to conclude a security agreement with Ukraine. The president emphasized that his peace plan for Ukraine includes the division of territory. A peace agreement is complicated because you're dividing territory in a certain way. It's like a very complicated real estate deal multiplied by 1,000. He also stated if the war in Ukraine isn't stopped, it could escalate into World War III. So this is the situation. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. Tomorrow, Saturday, is going to be a very interesting day, but there are lots of talks, lots of negotiations are ahead of us, and all these times the Russians will continue their offensive operation, and there are very high chances that the Russians can take under complete control the entire Donbass region before the end of all these talks and negotiations, and obviously if it happens, Russia will change their demands. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.